Shalom, I'm Mark Regev, and welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. I'm here in Jerusalem at the JNS studios with my co-host, Ruthie Blum. How are you today, Ruthie?
I'm pretty good, Mark. Thank you. Before we start, I would like to remind everybody that JNS is holding its first international policy summit at the end of April 27th and 8th at the Waldorf Astoria in Jerusalem. And you can register either by going to jns.org or you can see the banner at the beginning of our program on the screen. And when we're done, if you liked our show, please like, subscribe, and click the notification bell. Okay, now that business is out of the way, Mark, today is Purim, or it's about to be Purim. It's the eve of Purim. Tell us a little bit about that, and so we can discuss its relevance today.
So it's a special day in Israel, especially for children. On the way to the studio this morning, I saw all these little elementary school children, or if you're British or Australian primary school children, dressed up in their fancy dress costumes on their way to school, because it's a huge kids festival, Purim, in Israel. But Purim has a more serious note, part of the Jewish heritage. The celebration is of, and I don't know why it's connected to dressing up, maybe you do, but it's a celebration of a plot against the Jews of Persia, when there was, according to Jewish tradition, according to the sources, a king was convinced by an evil advisor, the king of Persia, by an evil advisor, Haman, or in Hebrew you say Haman, to destroy all the Jews, basically to commit genocide against the Jews of Persia. And because of the bravery of a young Jewish woman, maybe there's a feminist element there, I don't know, and her uncle, her wise uncle, maybe it's sexist because she's beautiful and he's wise, it's not the other way around, the Jewish people are saved because the king is told not to trust the counsel of the evil advisor and to save the Jews. And then the Purim celebration is the fact that the Jews who were facing genocide in ancient Persia can bounce back and their enemies were defeated. That's the story of Purim. That's how we celebrate it. Now, what's this got to do with what's going on today, Ruthie?
Okay, so first of all, I just want to correct you on one little thing when you said, well, maybe it's a little sexist, but actually Esther, the woman you're talking about, she was beautiful, but she certainly was wise.
And brave.
Brave, for sure, brave, but she used her beauty in a wise way. And so, there's nothing, and anyway, I don't like that word sexist. We talk about that all the time. Not around me, okay? Anyway, so, first of all, the reason Purim is relevant today, aside from the fact that Persia is modern-day Iran, and Iran has been trying to wipe us off the map since 1979 when the Ayatollah Khomeini took over and created the Ayatollah-led regime there. But since October 7th, 2023, what we're seeing that's similar, and this happens in all of Israel's wars, mostly anyway, that the enemies do not make a distinction between one Jew and another. The same thing happened during Purim. There were different kinds of Jews, as there always are, different political opinions, different everything. But as Hamas showed us on October 7th, it doesn't matter if you're left, right, religious, secular, anything. You are deserving of slaughter. So now, another interesting theme of Purim is this business of opposites. It's true, the kids dress up, but one of the reasons and everyone's supposed to get drunk and parade around. It's also a silly holiday. It's supposed to be. It's both serious and silly. Well, Israel right now is in the throes of this horrible paradox and dilemma, not just because there's a political rift between left and right, between the government and the opposition to the government, but because we have camps that believe that we have to end the war in Gaza, just get the hostages out, end the war, not defeat Hamas. Some say we haven't, we can't. And others say, no, we have to defeat Hamas. Of course, we have to get out as many live hostages or all the hostages possible. Hamas is not going to agree to that anyway. Anyway, we are in a huge internal battle, even while fighting on multiple fronts, enemies on multiple fronts.
I agree that just as Haman, according to Jewish tradition, wanted to kill all the Jews, and it didn't matter if they were rich or poor or righteous or not righteous or whoever they were, men, women. So there's a common denominator there with Hamas, as there were often with anti-Semites throughout history. I mean, Hitler, if you'd converted to Catholicism, Hitler still considered you a Jew and you were sent off to be murdered. And it should remind, Jews, we can have our arguments and we can passionately debate all the issues, but ultimately to use a dramatic word, our destiny, is very much as a people. You raised the issue very correctly of Persia, which is today modern Iran. And here in Jewish tradition, there's something to think about here, because obviously there's Haman, who is the epitome of evil for the Jews, the man who wanted to slaughter us all, who was ultimately defeated in the story. But in the Jewish tradition, there is also a more positive way of looking at ancient Persia, and that is through Cyrus the Great, who the king of ancient Persia, who allowed the Jews to return from exile and rebuild their kingdom, rebuild their independence, and rebuild their temple in Jerusalem. In fact, if you read, I think it's in Harry Truman's autobiography, he writes that he was the modern Cyrus, that he helped the Jews return by recognizing the state of Israel and supporting partition and all this sort of thing. So we know that there are many Hamans around today, specifically in the government of Iran, who would like nothing better than to see all the Jews slaughtered and Israel destroyed. But there's also a tradition in Iran of Cyrus the Great, which many of the opponents of the current Islamic Republic, the Ayatollah regime, oppose, and they embrace Cyrus as the Great heritage. And we should remember that the previous regime of Iran, which wasn't perfect in any way, the Shah's regime, nevertheless had a good relationship with Israel, a productive relationship with Israel. And I can tell you, when I was born in Australia, as you know, Ruthie, on my first trip to Australia, when you fly from Asia to Israel, you fly over the Middle East, and our El Al plane, yes, we landed British Airways, we flew to Tehran, and then we took an El Al airline, Tehran, Israel. How times have changed.
Well, times have changed, and they've also stayed the same, because, you were talking about how there's this common thread. I was reminded of my eldest son, who I won't tell you how old he is today, because then that will give away my age. But he was 5 years old at the time, and I was putting him to bed. And my children all grew up, were born and raised in Jerusalem. And he said to me, remind me again, Haman was the Hitler of Purim or Passover? So and he was only 5. And you said, see, this is our destiny, that our enemies who want to destroy us, it's interchangeable. Now, my question, though, is, have we ever learned anything? You know how we're constantly screaming, we need unity, Jewish unity. Now, forget for a second, there are Jews all over the world, not just in Israel. But I want to ask you something. Is that even possible? Right now, I have to admit, I don't feel unity with the protest movement, and they sure as hell don't feel unity with me. What does that even mean? And is it possible? Yes, our soldiers go and they fight, and they're fighting in Gaza right now. Not really. Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. But I want to know, how is there such a thing? Even when we're fighting an existential war, and October 7th showed us that it really didn't matter what side of the spectrum we were on, and if you were pro-judicial reform or anti-judicial reform, or pro-Netanyahu or anti-Netanyahu, they didn't care. And they thought of all the kibbutz residents as settlers. They didn't make no distinction. But again, it took 5 minutes before us to be in this. internal war, and we see it now. It's true, we see it more highlighted by the media, and maybe we're not really in an internal war. But is it even possible to have unity with people whose values, whose ideas you think are wrong? And I won't even go as far as to say evil, okay, but to say that they're harmful.
So Israel's a democratic society, and you'll obviously have differences of opinion, as you do in all democracies, and people will passionately debate the issues and articulate what they believe in. And that's natural and that's normal. But have we become over-polarized? Have we emphasized what divides us and not what unites us? I think that's definitely true. Israeli politics is extremely polarized, as is American politics today. If you watch an American political talk show, people will sometimes say, in the old days, Democrats and Republicans could work together in a way that today has become impossible. Yes. So we're getting that way in Israel too, and it's not good. We should be able to have our disagreements in some sort of civil way and understand that we're all here to, with our common threats and our common challenges and our common hopes and dreams. But having said that, you say, is there any evidence? And you sort of said it yourself, but I'd like to restate the point. It's true that if you watch the media and you watch debates in the Knesset, it's very polarized. But is that really reflective of larger Israeli society? And I'll give you an example. Your son was in a combat unit in Gaza, right? Now, in his unit, there were people who were religious and secular. In his unit, there are people who are left and who are right. There are in his unit people who like Netanyahu and hate Netanyahu. And they're all fighting, brothers in arms, and they are willing to lay down their lives for each other. And that's unity on the ground. That's real unity, right? And you might respect or not respect the opinions of others, but you work together because you're a team, you're a family. And I think that is very much still alive in Israel. And somehow that unity doesn't translate up to the political level, and that's a pity.
This is a great segue into the next topic that's related, by the way. We just saw the inauguration or the instatement of a new IDF Chief of Staff, Eyal Zamir. He replaced Herzi Halevi. Now, we don't need to get into inside baseball here. So let's look at the bigger picture and why I think it's a very good sign and it's encouraging to me. Of course, he's brand new. We don't know. But just judging by the speech he made when he was instated and then went to meet with troops in the north and the south, etc., and things he said, and the main message he was conveying was, aside from we had the worst thing happen to us on October 7th and we have to investigate it and we've got to, we've got to heal and we will heal. He said, our mission in the Israeli army is victory over the enemy, defeating the enemy to the last one and securing a victory. Now, you'd think that makes total sense. I mean, he's the chief of staff of the Israeli army. Any head of any army should think that's his mission. But I'll tell you, his predecessor sure did not talk like that before October 7th. Afterwards, he was a little busy. Okay, and we won't get into how responsible he was personally for that. But I'll tell you something, he spoke more like a social worker than an IDF soldier, certainly not the chief of the army, because he was talking about how he, like the head of our Shin Bet internal security service, they both were going around giving talks at conferences saying that really our external enemy is less of a problem for us than our internal strife. And he was talking, of course, about the argument over judicial reform. Now, aside from the fact that Hamas saw that and mistakenly thought that we were so torn apart that we wouldn't be able to pull ourselves together, Hamas was wrong. But I find it refreshing that the new IDF chief did not stress our purity of arms doctrine, by the way, which was in the 1990s crafted by Asa Kasher, who today is one of the leading protest voices and who hates the government. And I'm just happy we didn't hear any more about how how we're the purest army. No, we've got to win. And that's what this chief of staff is saying.
So I was watching the news last night, and they had Israeli soldiers, the Israel military, active on 4 fronts on the same day, in the same news broadcast, which was summarizing what had happened over the last few hours. Israeli forces had been active in Syria against enemy targets. Israeli forces had taken out a senior Hezbollah commander in Lebanon. I think it was the head of their naval operations, but I could be wrong. But it was a senior Hezbollah target. In Gaza, we were active against Hamas, who were breaking the ceasefire and doing certain things. And so we pinpointedly targeted what they were doing. They were apparently moving close to our troops in a threatening way. And in the West Bank, in Jenin, our soldiers were active in fighting terrorist infrastructure there. And then I woke up this morning and heard on the morning news that Israel is preparing to strike against the Houthis in Yemen because they apparently have announced that the ceasefire is over and they're going to start shooting missiles against us. And if they do so, Israel will be ready to go there and seek them out. Now, I don't know if this is all because of General Zamir, our new chief of staff, but it's clear that the IDF is active in defending this country, in proactively seeking out our enemies and hitting them before they can hit us. And that's a good thing. The whole idea that we wait around for them to hit us, yes, we wait around for another October 7th, that we don't proactively go out there and deal with them before they can hit us, I think that's a good move. The Houthis in Yemen were flying these rockets. Your sleep in Tel Aviv was all too often disturbed by Houthi rockets. I remember
Drones.
the drones. And I was in where I live in Modi'in. Yes, for some reason we're also the target of their rockets, even though we're not in the center of we are in the center of the country, but we're between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. We're not a major urban center. Yes, we're a minor urban center. And yet, the sirens would go off in Modi'in, and we would be running to the bomb shelters as well. I just hope, yes, that if the Houthis do start shooting their rockets at Israel again, our response will be devastating, and that I believe there's a good chance that the coalition, the American, the Brits, the others who've been active against the Houthis also, because ultimately they've been stopping shipping through the Suez Canal and threatening ships of all nations, that the Houthis will understand that they can't shoot rockets at Israel and disrupt international shipping in the way they did in the past.
Well, you're absolutely right. But, the IDF chief of staff does not make that decision. It's the prime minister, basically, and the defense minister, but it's the government that has to send in the army. He's preparing. We're amassing troops. He said, we've got to be prepared, and you're right. But it's not up to him to make those decisions. And by the way, that brings us back to predecessors there. The previous chief of staff and the one before him, they took it upon themselves to make decisions that really were not theirs to make. And that cost us dearly on October 7th. The main decision being not to wake up the prime minister and the defense minister that there was something going on, because then maybe the government would instruct them to preempt, to launch, or to at least prepare. And then Hamas would see us preparing and would escalate. This was what we call the conceptia. Now,
conception in English.
Well, but it isn't really conception. No. It's a worldview. It's a worldview. It really isn't like conception or concept. And but the point is that the current one, he's saying, I'm ready. Just tell me, aim and fire. And that is up to our government. And we've got to see whether Netanyahu and his government, I know they're talking tough, but the trouble is that the hostage families keep saying, don't do it. Don't do it because you're going to endanger the hostages. Don't go back to war. Don't do this. Don't do that. Don't prevent them from getting humanitarian aid. Hamas. So we are right now in a really terrible situation. And I have to say, no Israeli, we've got to stress this again and again, sadly. There is no Israeli who doesn't want to see every single hostage, certainly the live one, back immediately. But we also have to take into account that we're releasing hundreds, thousands of terrorists into who are going to commit other October 7th. And we're also, we have Many, many soldiers have been killed in the effort to win this war and to find the hostages. And, if we leave Hamas in power, what have we done? We've just done, we were going all the way back to October 6th. And at some point, I have to say this, since Hamas is never going to release all those terrorists, not terrorists. We're releasing the terrorists. Hamas is never going to release all those innocent hostages. And we are going to have to make a decision to go back to war, including if there are some hostages left there. And anybody who says that today is attacked as heartless. So go ahead and attack me for that. But I think there's going to be no choice.
And we're actually in a very interesting moment, which isn't talked about a lot. But Israel agreed to a ceasefire a few weeks ago because we were getting hostages out. That ceasefire theoretically should have come to an end because Hamas has stopped releasing hostages. Yet Israel has decided that we're not reinitiating hostilities, we're preparing to do so, but we're giving a chance for another deal. And so you could say this is the worst of worlds for Israel today, because on one hand, we're not fighting Hamas and then we're not getting no hostages out at the same time. It's a situation that has to be temporary. Either more hostages, have to be coming out of Hamas captivity, out of Hamas's dungeons, or we have to go back to fighting. And it's either or. I don't know how long we can keep pushing it forward, that the ceasefire continues and Hamas not releasing hostages. What we have done, which at this stage I think is largely symbolic, is that we've cut off the aid shipments going into Gaza, the food and so forth going into Gaza. They, of course, after weeks of receiving a lot, I don't think there are any shortages in Gaza. So maybe that's more symbolic. It could have long-term effect. But the current situation is not sustainable. Either there's an understanding, a deal reached to release all hostages, or we go back to war. And Hamas has to understand that if hostages aren't released, General Zamir, who is aggressive, he will do what needs to be done. Our arms supplies have been refurnished, rebuilt as a result of the new American administration, which has not allowed backlogs to develop. We're armed, we're ready, and if Hamas doesn't release hostages, we'll be back, unfortunately, but necessarily back at war.
Well, you're right, I hope. It's true. We're giving President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, a little more time to try to get a few more hostages out, etc. We also had that catastrophe this week of Adam Bowler, that idiot who didn't know what he was doing, and he was already saying nice things about Hamas. That is over now. But here's the thing, Mark. You say we're going to unfortunately have to. The question always is, what if not? Now, we know what you say. Hamas knows that Eyal Zamir is ready to go in there. No, Hamas knows that any time it just lifts its head, protesters go out to the streets of Tel Aviv and they say two things. They say Netanyahu is killing the hostages, end the war, whatever. And then they're also saying, thank you, President Trump, for helping us. Now, let's not forget that it's President Trump who said, go in there and destroy them. He gave us a gift and we're not taking it. How long do you think Trump will wait for that? He gave Netanyahu permission. I mean, he's the world leader. Okay, he's the leader of the free world. The Biden administration was tying Israel's hands. Now the Trump administration is saying, listen, we understand that what has been done to your people is inexcusable. These are monsters. We got to get them out of there. All the gates of hell should open up if they don't return all the hostages by a certain date. Well, the gates of hell didn't open up because we are listening to now. I'm not saying that this isn't a dilemma for our government, but make no mistake, when you say Hamas knows and Hamas knows, I think what Hamas knows is that we care about people too much and that they, in that respect, have the upper hand. That's what they have learned.
So that's true. They know that our civilians and the people they hold hostages, from their point of view, a great asset. It gives them control. It gives them the ability to use Israeli society's feelings for these people who are still alive in Gaza, yes, being held by Hamas, and forget the politics. All Israelis, as you say, want the hostages out. And there are some people who say very vocally at any price. And I think you and me agree that as much as we want all the hostages out, it can't be at the expense that Hamas wins the war. And let's just reiterate, the government has articulated a number of goals of this war in Gaza. One is getting the whole hostages out, but another one is we can't have Hamas in power in Gaza threatening another October 7th, and this war has to end with Hamas out of power, a goal that has been agreed to by the Americans and by even some of the Europeans. Surprise, surprise. Hamas cannot remain in Gaza in power when this is over. And very, very quietly, a lot of the Arab countries agree with that goal as well. So to what extent, because you want to save your people, and of course we want to save our people, do you then freeze all the other goals? Some of the hostage protesters will say, well, let's just destroy Hamas. Sorry, let's release all the hostages, and then when we've got all the hostages out, we can destroy Hamas then. That's sort of a simplistic line that they use. But I don't think it's true, because Hamas understands that they'll never really release all the hostages. They'll always have someone there that they think they can blackmail us with. Having said that, I believe we should do all we can to get hostages out. And I think that's what the government's been doing. Do all we can to get hostages out. At the same time, being very strong on the goal that when this is over, Hamas's military machine in Gaza will be destroyed and Hamas will no longer be ruling the Gaza Strip.
Well, absolutely. So my question then is, are those two goals incompatible? This isn't the first time that question has been raised. It keeps being raised. When you say we'll get as many out as we can, and then we simultaneously, we have to fulfill both war goals, and that's true. But we've now seen that maybe they're not compatible, and we can't have them both simultaneously. I have to say, we've gotten out the majority of the hostages. Now, there are also many dead hostages. The families are saying every day that goes on, you're endangering them, they're starving, they're being tortured, and that's all true. So, and by the way, it's so naive to say, we'll just get the hostages, end the war, and at a later date, we'll go back in. Guess what attitude that was? October 6th. We had a ceasefire with Hamas. You know how many times we've had to go back in, come back out, go back in, kill a few soldiers. We never took care of all those tunnels and all those terrorists. We haven't finished. But what if, I'm asking you, Mark, what if we have to do it and risk some of the remaining hostages, which is why, by the way, I say, with all the pain of the families of those who have dead, whose loved ones are already dead and they know it for certain. Some of them don't know for certain, who know it for certain. Should we be risking the soldiers' lives and the rest of the country's lives with all that release of bloodthirsty terrorists for dead bodies? I have to say, and when people ask me if that were your child, I say, no, if it were my child and he were alive is different for if it were my child and I knew he was dead already. So I don't know. You answer that question.
So there's not an easy answer to that question. According to official Israel, there are up to 24 live hostages in Gaza today, but I choose my words up to very carefully because for us, for Israel to officially declare a hostage dead, there has to be overwhelming evidence. If there's just a hint or some evidence, but it's not conclusive. So that 24 number is the highest possible number.
Right.
And there was something, I think it was in the New York Times a few days ago, which suggested that the number is indeed, unfortunately, much higher. And that could be true. I think, yes, we can put our foot, there are two goals here: destroy Hamas and its rule of Gaza and get the hostages out. And sometimes you put your foot on that accelerator and sometimes you put your foot on the other accelerator. If it's possible to get more of the live hostages out at the moment, if it's possible, I'd put my foot on that accelerator. If that proves impossible, that Hamas is unwilling, then you have to put your foot on the other accelerator. And maybe that will help you be able to pivot back to the former accelerator and get more out. It's a bit like saying, when when Trump threatens, Hamas with destruction and all hell will break loose and so forth, is he doing it because he wants Hamas to be destroyed? Maybe. Is he doing it because he wants to incentivize Hamas to compromise and make a deal with us? Maybe also. In other words, you can have two goals simultaneously in place. Sometimes, once again, you press that and sometimes you press that. I think at the moment, my understanding is the government of Israel is willing for a hostage to pay a price for a hostage release, but it's not willing to totally back down to Hamas and just say, you stay in power and we're giving up the war, and Hamas controls Gaza.
So why, since the government is doing that, answer me, why are those protesters, many of them hostage families and many hijackers of the hostage families, let's make that clear, okay? Because there are a lot of forces at work here on the left and the deep state, and I'll say it without any apology, actually encouraging the hostage families to say these horrific things to the government, mainly being that each day that passes, Netanyahu is sentencing more hostages to death, when in fact, each day that passes, he's enabling Hamas to regroup. He's doing the opposite. He's helping the hostage families. He's actually going against what I think we should be doing, and he's doing it for a good reason. And the reason is as many hostages as we can rescue before we go back in a full ground invasion. So why are they accusing him constantly of murdering the hostages when he's actually doing what they want? He's not actually doing what the right wing wants. He's doing the opposite.
And that's the dilemma he faces. And it's very difficult. And what did, I talked about him before, President Truman say, the buck stops here. Yes, ultimately the decisions are with the senior level of government, and they are difficult decisions. They are terrible decisions because on one hand, you've got the lives of people who are very tangible, and you speak to their families and you've seen the pictures, and these people's lives are in danger today, and that's a fact. And then you've got the less tangible, but the knowledge that if Hamas stays in power, how many lives will be lost in the future. And it's a terrible, terrible dilemma. Once again, my understanding of the policy of the government is to try to get as many people out as possible. And so far, if you think about it, over 250 people were taken on October 7th. And the fact that the number left inside every human being 59. Is important. Yeah. It means we've got the overwhelming majority of them out. Yes. But those left, and you have to ask the following question. And this is, I think, to all the people who say just give in to Hamas's demands, does anyone really think that Hamas will release all the hostages?
No, but I didn't ask you about, I understand the government's dilemma. I'm asking you about what the protesters are screaming about at Netanyahu. What are they screaming about? They're saying that he's killing them with each passing day when he is actually, you said, put your foot on the accelerator of the hostages. That's what he's doing. I'm asking you about them, not about the government. In fact, there are voices in the government that weren't happy about this. They want to emphasize the war. Now, that's their dilemma. I am saying that he is actually doing, he's emphasizing the return of the hostages. Why are they protesting against him and calling him a murderer of the hostages? That's what I'm asking you.
So I make a distinction between hostage families who are undergoing immense pain, and from my perspective, I don't necessarily agree with everything they say, but they have the right to say, they have the right to say that, and we should listen to their pain. There's no doubt that there is political, and we talked about at the beginning of this episode, we talked about polarization in Israeli society, and many people like the prime minister, many people hate the prime minister, and some of his political opponents who are telling him to make a deal at any price will in the end criticize him that Hamas is still in power, right? But that's the way politics is played, maybe on both sides. And we started this conversation, yes. We talked about national unity And we talked about, the need to us to understand that we have a common destiny as a Jewish people. And maybe with that, I'd just like to remind of something, and we've come to the end of our time, remind of something that people need to think about it. We talked about Haman, and we talked about Hitler, and we talked about Hamas. Well, they're all beginning with H's, yes?
Yeah.
And the Jewish people over centuries have faced genocidal maniacs who want to kill us, right? And so people can say, well, if there was Haman in antiquity, and there was Hitler in the 20th century, and now we've got Hamas, some things don't change. There are still those maniacs, and they still want to kill the Jews, right? But something has changed. Something very important has changed. And that is today there is a state of Israel, and that we are sovereign, and we are independent, and we have a military, and we don't have to beg the king of Persia to protect us, and we don't have to beg the allies, Roosevelt and Churchill, to bomb the camps. We can defend ourselves, and that's a huge change. And that's an important change, and something we should appreciate.
Well, thank you. We can dispute some of that, next week.
I look forward to that.
So do I.